Hello, welcome to Creative You Podcast. Thank you for sharing 15 minutes of your day with me. I'm Catherine Kirby. We talk about knitting, crocheting, and life. So, those of you who have tuned in, I have been working on the Gossypium cowl, and it's meant to be done in a worsted weight yarn. It's a free pattern by Jenn with 2 N's, Kinzel. And I'll write down this information. It's meant to be done in a worsted weight yarn, and not thinking, I picked up a chunky yarn. This is Debbie Bliss Rialto Chunky, which is a wonderful merino yarn. Now, once this is blocked, so hopefully tomorrow, it's going to look very different. Right now it wants to curl up. Also, when I joined it in the round, it wasn't clear to me for a while, I'm showing you the wrong side here, that I had my stitches twisted. And since I am going to wear this, I don't really mind it. In fact, I kind of like it. Or I could put the twist in the back, because this is the way it's going to lay. When it lays like that, she shows it like that, but oftentimes in a scarf pattern, you will actually do 2 separate panels and then join them, because as you see, the wrong side is going to show. So unless you put a pin or something, I'm not sure if you put a little pin there. I'm not sure how you're going to prevent that. I'm going to make another one. It might also be nice to have it be smaller, just like a net cowl for winter. So I'm going to experiment. Maybe if you just leave it like that, it would, yeah, but you're going to have this hanging out. So I'll block it. I'll see what happens. I let these 2 strands here for a purpose, to show one of the problems when you work in ends, especially with chunky yarn. You're going to see them on the front. So here in the back, if I go underneath my stockinette stitch, I don't know if you can see on the front, but you're going to see that yarn come across. It's going to show. I have worked in some ends and I've tried to be very careful, but I'm sure there's spots where you can see them. So how do you avoid that? Well, one thing you can do is take the yarn and divide it and split it, and then work in the tiny ends separately. That is one thing that you can do. When I block this, I think it's even going to show more when I worked in ends. So more on this later. I'm going to do another one. I think driving around and seeing all these dusty rose-colored trees in bloom has inspired me to do the pinks. So different color of pink, but this is Juniper Moonshine, which is silk, alpaca, and wool. And we're going to get a different effect because it's a worsted weight, not a chunky. We had talked about cool colors and warm colors. Cool colors have blue added. Warm colors have yellow added. And here you can see the difference. This one has blue added to the pink. This one has yellow. And in the background, I had the pleasure of picking some lilacs, and they smell wonderful. I'm reading a book right now set in 1893, and a lady doctor goes to this town in Colorado, and one of the gentlemen who is widowed begins to fall for her. And he's helping her to set up her clinic, and she sends him upstairs to get a woolen blanket. Remember, they didn't say wool, they said woolen. And he finds the blanket on her bed, but her nightgown is laying over it. He's trying not to get involved because his first wife died, and he doesn't want to get involved and have his heart broken again. But he realizes that to get the blanket, he has to touch her nightgown. And what does it smell like? Lilacs. My grandmother used to say lilacs, but anyway. So with the EllaRae Sun Kiss yarn, and this yarn will do striping, I started a new pattern. It is from the book 60 Quick Knits from America's Yarn Shops. It's from a pattern called Striped Dress. It's very cute. I did notice that people that have done it before have said there's issues with the pattern once you get to the bodice. So I'm glad for that heads up. I am not going to do the stripes. Then I don't have to worry with jogless stripes and carrying yarns, because I think it's every 4 rows. And this yarn is going to do some pretty striping by itself. I picked a high contrast purple. This is the bottom of the dress. And if you look at the bottom there, you see that little sawtooth edge. And that is going to happen when I fold the bottom under and do a light hem. It's going to look like that. This part was fun to do, slip stitch knitting. And I don't think that it's going to take too much more to do this than it would a cowl, because you cast on, you knit for 7 inches, and so this is for the infant size, and then you go into the bodice. So more on that later. This is Taki Cotton Classic. And I read a story yesterday about a teacher, and I think we all need encouragement. And so I'm going to convey another story. Also, you know, we did a thing on fringes, and ever since then, I just am drawn to things with fringes. And I never want you to think I'm making fun of anyone. I just would like to hear your input. This is a pattern that's going to be released, and it's a vest. And what is your reaction to that? Fringe coming out the middle just on one side. They always say in art, you have to know the rules to break the rules, and then it has to be interesting. So this is a story on Fact Soup, which is on YouTube, that is about a teacher that had to tell a boy in a 3rd grade class at St. Mary's School in Morris, Minnesota, to be quiet all the time. Mark Eklund, he was always talking, but neat in appearance, likable, happy to be alive type of kid that made even his occasional mischievous delightful. Anytime that the sister, the nun, he talked incessantly, would correct him over and over and over not to talk without permission. He would always say, "Thank you, sister, for correcting me." He was so sincere. He wasn't just saying it. "Thank you for correcting me, sister." And so she didn't know what to make of it at first, but before long I became accustomed to hearing it many times a day. One morning my patience was growing thin when Mark talked once too often, and I made a novice teacher's mistake. I looked at Mark and said, "If you say one more word, I am going to tape your mouth shut." It wasn't 10 seconds later when Chuck blurted out, "Mark is talking again." I hadn't asked any of the students to help me watch Mark. They call those kids now not tattletales, but the class informer. I had to act on my threat. I remember the scene as if it occurred this morning. I walked to my desk very deliberately, opened my drawer, and took out a roll of masking tape. She tapes his mouth shut. Without saying a word, she just goes to his desk, made a big X over his mouth. Then she returns to the front of the room. And as she glanced at him to see how he was handling this, he winked at me. That did it. I started laughing. The class cheered as I walked back to Mark's desk, removing the tape, and shrugged my shoulders. His first words were, "Thank you for correcting me, sister." At the end of the year, I was asked to teach junior high math. The years flew by, and before I knew it, Mark was in my classroom again. He was more handsome than ever and just as polite. Since he had to listen carefully to my instructions in new math, he did not talk as much in 9th grade. One Friday, things just didn't feel right. We had worked hard on a new concept all that week, and the students were frustrated with themselves and edgy one another. I had to stop this crankiness before it got out of hand. So I asked them to take out a piece of paper and list the names of all the other students, and then to think of the nicest things they could say about each other and write them down. It took the remainder of the class period to finish that assignment, and as the students left the room, they all handed me their papers. Mark said, "Thank you for teaching me, sister. Have a good weekend." That Saturday, I wrote down the name of every student on a separate sheet of paper and listed what everyone had said about them. On Monday, I gave each student their list. I heard comments like, "Really? I didn't know everyone liked me so much." No one ever mentioned those papers again. I never knew if they discussed them after class or said anything to their parents. The exercise had accomplished its purpose. The students were happy with themselves and each other. That group of students moved on. Several years later, I returned and my parents met me at the airport. As they were driving home, my mother asked me the usual questions about the weather, my trip, things in general. Then she gave Dad a sideways glance and simply said, "Dad?" My father cleared his throat and said, "The Ucklands called last night." The Eklunds. "Really?" I said. "I haven't heard from them in years. I wonder how Mark is doing." "Mark was killed in Vietnam," he said. "The funeral is tomorrow." This really hit her hard. So she went to the funeral. Said I'd never seen a serviceman in a military coffin before. He looked so handsome, so mature, and all I could think of was Mark with that masking tape X across his lip. She goes on to talk about it. The graveside, the pastor said the usual prayer, the bugler played taps, and one by one, those who loved Mark took a last walk by the coffin. So one of the soldiers who acted as pallbearer came up to me. "Were you Mark's math teacher?" I nodded as I continued to stare at the coffin. "Mark talked about you a lot," he said. After the funeral, most of Mark's former classmates headed to Chuck's farmhouse for lunch. Mark's parents were waiting for me. "We want to show you something," the father said, taking a wallet out of his pocket. "They found this on Mark when he was killed." You got it. "We thought you might recognize it." Opening the billfold, he carefully took out 2 worn pieces of notebook paper that had been taped, folded, retaped. I knew without looking that this was the one where The children had listed all the good things about Mark. "Thank you so much for doing that," Mark's mother said. "As you can see, Mark treasured it." Mark's classmates started to gather around. Charlie smiled rather sheepishly and said, "I still have my list. I keep it in the top drawer of my desk." Chuck's wife said, "Chuck asked me to put it in our wedding album. I have mine too." Marilyn said, "It's in my diary." Vicky reached in her pocketbook and took out her worn, frazzled list. "I carry this with me at all times," Vicky said. "I think we all saved our list." That's when I finally sat down and cried. So I don't think I can go on, but you can find that on YouTube. And it just reminded me this week, compliment somebody. Don't wait for their funeral. Tell them what you like about them. And in the meantime, keep that precious smile. And through all your difficulties, shine, baby, shine.